Greetings, all. This is Rick Levine with your April mid-month update. For those of you who are on my email list, you know that normally the mid-month updates go out only to Patreon subscribers at the solar level and higher. But because there's so much going on this month, I wanted to bring the mid-month update to everyone. So this is a publicly published video, and feel free to share this or post it on social media or whatever you'd like to do with it. I am recording this early in the morning on April 15th, and we will be talking about the remainder of April. And just a very, very quick note before I move into the actual material. I'm not going to be talking about any of my upcoming events other than mentioning that I will be in Europe, in London and Portugal, Porto, and then in Stockholm, and then down in Milan, and then back up to Copenhagen through May and into early mid-June. And I have all the information and links on that posted in the first pinned comment below, so you can follow up to any of those that if you're in the area, and I'm looking forward to seeing many of you there. That's it. Coming back to now the material at hand, we're at a turning point. I mean, look, astrologers all over the planet have been talking about 2025 being a turning point, and that March, April, May is certainly a key period in this. And of course, for those of you who have been following me and or other astrologers, you know that Pluto's move into Aquarius from 2023 into 2024. Now Pluto is solidly in early degrees of Aquarius. We begin mid-April on April 15th. Pluto is almost reaching 4 degrees of Aquarius. It's at 3 degrees and 44 minutes of Aquarius. That's 3 3/4 degrees of Aquarius on April 15th. And of course, we have Neptune having just moved into Aries, as it does once every 165 years. And we've had Neptune enter Aries at the very end of March. And so we have Neptune at about a 0.5 degree of Aries, kind of creating some newness in the energy that we're getting all through April. And then in May, we have Saturn moving from Pisces into Aries, as it does once every 29, 30 years. And then by July, we have Uranus moving from Taurus into Gemini. And I think all of these changes that are happening in such a rapid period of time, this incredible dynamic shift of outer planet energies, is really feeding what it is that's going on now. Now we're going to bring this back to April, but before we did that, I just wanted to kind of give you the wider perspective, the wider view of how much shifting there is in outer planet movement that really is putting us into a new place. Now, in February and March, we've had this inner planet retrograde swing where we had first Mars, then Venus and Mercury all turning retrograde. And as of today, on April 15th, all the planets are direct. We're in one of those rare moments where all the visible planets plus Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron, and Eris are all moving direct. And it's going to feel like things are really bolting ahead for a bit. We what's interesting about April is that even though Mars, Venus, and Mercury are now having turned direct. Mars turned direct back at the end of February, I think February 23rd, and it moved direct all through March, albeit slowly. Now Mars is moving quite quickly, and Mars actually moves into Leo on April 17. We'll look at that chart again in just a moment. And what's important to understand about Mars is that Mars actually entered into its shadow back last October, and it turned at about 17 degrees of Cancer, and it moved all the way up to about 6 degrees of Leo, and it turned retrograde at the beginning of December. Now, as Mars was moving direct through that period of time, as it was moving from as it was moving from Cancer into Leo, and that occurred on November 3rd, just the day before Election Day in the United States. Mars moved into Leo, and it just prior to that, just hours prior to that, it actually opposed Pluto. And this Mars-Pluto opposition is absolutely significant through the remainder of April because um, because Mars will oppose Pluto for the third and final time on April 26th. And it moves again into Leo on April 17th. So we have Mars since it turned direct back in February, on February 23rd. Mars has been retracing the path that it moved through back last year in October and November. And then when it turned retrograde in December, it moved back over that same path from Leo back into Cancer, and then turned direct on the 23rd. And since then, it's been playing the same energies again for the third and final time. What's significant when a planet like Mars makes significant aspects as it's going through that direct retrograde direct cycle is that events, that astrological events like the Mars opposed Pluto, or like Mars trine Saturn, which it did during this period of time too. What's significant here is that an event that typically happens for a few days, over a period of a few days, and maybe every other year, approximately a little bit less than that, all of a sudden those events stretch out over months of time, because again, going back to last November, we had November, December, January, February, March, April. It's literally 6 months of Mars working its way through its opposition to Pluto. And this Mars Pluto cycle is very important because um, Mars being the a god of war, the god the Greek god of war, Mars being archetypally the planet that has to do with energetic direction. It has to do with how we move our energy forward, and what we encounter when we move our energy forward is often the boundaries that are set up by circumstances or other people. And Mars is really how we meet those boundaries, or how we choose not to meet those boundaries. Mars is the definition of how we make our outer boundaries and how we engage into new territory or choose not to. Now, as Mars was moving through Cancer, as it did through last um, September, October, when it entered its shadow in at the beginning of October, and all the way up through the beginning of December, Mars in Cancer is basically putting that energy, the physicality, the assertion of the archetypal energy of Mars towards defending its territory, because Cancer is about it's about self-protection. Cancer, remember, is the hard outer shell and the feeling like on the inside that there's vulnerability. Remember, the crab has no backbone. This is the major difference between Cancer and Capricorn, and that is that in Capricorn, Where Mars is exalted, in Capricorn, we have this backbone that gives us verticality and hierarchy and the ability to master the outer world, to move upward and outward. Whereas in Cancer, Mars is more internalized and it's more about self-protection. Again, if you think of a crab with the hard outer shell, the crab is basically fighting off the environment by creating this protective hard outer shell. Now, Mars has been back in Cancer. It retrograded um, uh, um, after having moved into Leo back in December. It retrograded back into Cancer, and it did that back at the beginning of February, February 9th of this year. And ever since then, Mars in Cancer has been about self-protection. When you look at uh, the political moves that have been made by the newly elected government of the United States, a lot of it has been about protecting or the fear of vulnerability, whether it's this idea of protection on our borders, keeping foreigners and others, kind of like even to the extent of xenophobia, keeping that energy out. This is Mars in Cancer. This and then we also look at the whole idea of tariffs, about economic protection. These are all Mars in Cancer kind of energies. Now, on April 17th, uh, Mars actually leaves Cancer and moves back into Leo. And here we're going to see an externalization of energy, because Mars in Leo is about the following through with the intention and doing it on the external, expressing the energy outward. Mars in Leo is more naturally expressive. In Cancer, Mars gets judged often as ineffectual. It's really not, but it really operates out of the fear that rises from the need to protect, home or self or family or certainly country, falls into that. Now, as Mars moves into Leo, it's going to be coming very quickly into range of its third and final opposition to Pluto. And here, let's shift gears and look at the chart for April 15th, where we can see Mars at 29 degrees of Cancer. And it's already within, 4 degrees of that opposition to Pluto. The energy is there, but it's going to continue to build until the 26th, is when when the Mars opposed Pluto perfects, and we'll look at that chart in just a moment. But remember, Mars is about anger, it's about assertion, it's about over assertion or aggression. And Pluto is about the energy that is hidden, that creates the darkness where transformation occurs. Now, in a way, Pluto is associated, maybe all the outside of all the trans-Saturnian planets, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, but Pluto in particular is associated with the hell realms. Pluto being Latin for Hades, which is Greek for the Lord of the hell realms. And we need to understand, we need to remember that when we step outside of the Judeo-Christian understanding of hell, hell is a much richer and wider place, meaning that it is the place where metamorphosis occurs. It is the place where the transformation between the ending of one cycle and the beginning of another cycle occurs. When we think of the caterpillar transforming into a butterfly, its hell realm is basically when it's in the chrysalis, and the caterpillar has to die. It has to let go of its caterpillarness in order for it to be reborn in a higher order of energy, in a higher form, if you will, as a butterfly. So when Mars and Pluto engage, there often can be severe power struggles because Mars has an agenda. And part of Mars's agenda is holding on to what it thinks its boundaries are and not wanting to let go of it. So Mars is associated with our ego because our ego is about survival, and Mars is one of the tools that we use to survive. But when Mars meets Pluto, sometimes it finds itself engaging in things that it can't control. Pluto is deeper and wider and ultimately more powerful than Mars because Pluto has to do with that longer cycle. I've often said that Mars can win battle after battle, but Pluto will win the war. In other words, um, Mars can assert and aggress, but it can exhaust itself because the ultimate evolutionary transformation is going to occur under the auspices of Pluto. And so we look at this intense polarity that we've been experiencing all around the planet, particularly here in the United States, or perhaps particularly here in the United States, and realizing that the first Mars Pluto opposition was the day before Election Day when Donald Trump was elected president. And that on that same day, Mars moved from Cancer to Leo as the energy became expressed, that which was hidden became expressed outwardly. And now, here on April 15th, we can see that Mars at 29 degrees of Cancer is again coming into opposing Pluto for the third and final time. By the way, the second time on the retrograde was on January 2nd. And of course, January was the month of transfer of power here, leading up to Inauguration Day, presidential Inauguration Day. And we have another piece that we'll bring into that as we look at the Venus conjoined with Saturn, that here on April 15th, we can see is about a degree and a half of an orb. Venus at 24 and pretty close to 24 and three quarters of a degree. Um, and Saturn is at 26 and a quarter degree. So they're about a degree and a half apart, which is as wide as they've been apart all month. But Venus now has turned direct. Venus actually turned direct on the 12th. So here on the 15th, it's actually moving forward still very, very slowly. But Venus, as it moves forward, will catch up with Saturn. And again, this will be for its third and final time. So we have Mars making this opposition to Pluto for its third and final time. And again, this goes back to Election Day, the beginning of the year, and then the third and final one, which will be on April 26th. Meanwhile, the Venus Saturn, that's a bit of a different story because Venus conjoined with Saturn for the first of the three times, just a day or two, 2 days prior to Inauguration Day, which means that that was still part of a Venus Saturn conjunction. And it's important to note, just as a sidebar, that Donald Trump has Venus Saturn conjoined in his natal chart. So that first Venus Saturn conjunction, which is often about the feeling of isolation or separation, sometimes it's the feeling of not having enough pleasure or not being loved enough or not having enough money. Bill Gates, incidentally, also has a Venus Saturn conjunction, and we look at what motivates people like Bill Gates and or Donald Trump to accumulate so much money. Is there an insecurity factor or a feeling of being unloved on some level in that scenario? Something to think about. As Venus retrograded, though, and the Venus retrograde cycle, Venus turned retrograde back on March 1st. And as Venus turned retrograde, it joined up with Saturn. It conjoined Saturn for the second time. Remember, the first was on Inauguration Day or within a couple of days of that. And on its retrograde, it conjoined Saturn exactly on April 7th. And now, as it turns direct, or as it turned direct technically, just a few days ago, it will catch up with Saturn for the third and final time on April 24th. April has been an entire month of Venus conjoining Saturn. And in some ways, this is one of the factors behind the craziness of the tariff, roller coaster ride, for lack of a better term. And there's just this feeling of the not having enough, or the monetary issues kind of feeding into everything else that's going on. And that Venus, because it will conjoin Saturn for the third and final time on April 24th, even though Venus is turned direct already, and we may feel kind of bits of progress as Venus is moving direct now, as Mars is moving direct now, and even Mercury, which is moving direct now. Remember, Mercury turned direct back on April 7th. It had retrograded on in mid-March, March 14th, and Mercury still now is moving direct, but Mercury, Venus, and Mars, although they're all moving direct, are still all moving through their shadow areas, meaning they're not in places yet where they haven't been. They are moving through places that are still earlier degrees than when they turned retrograde. So it's it's like we can feel there's a taste of progress. Things and some level have changed, or are changing, and there's some moving forward, but we're not out of the woods yet. And this is the important thing to understand about the second half of April, because things are going to feel like they're moving forward, but there's going to be a feeling of deja vu. There's going to be a feeling of like it's going to be a long haul before we're clear of whatever this mess is that we've had, that we got ourselves into. It's certainly going to take a while to work our way out of it, but I think that we are going to get glimpses of, maybe it's alternating. I was going to say we're getting glimpses of hope, and I think we are, but I think we're getting alternating glimpses of hope and despair. And over the past couple of times I've been on the air, on social media, whether it was the April forecast or the April astrology night, both of which are still obviously available to look at, I talked a lot about the difference between disillusionment and discouragement. And without going into it again too deeply, it's important to understand that illusions are dreams. They're not untrue. They're just not yet realized or not yet discarded. And that it's okay to be disillusioned when we realize that things are not as we wish they would be. But it's not okay to be discouraged, because discouragement, or courage, actually comes from the heart, cœur, French for the heart. And so it's important not to lose heart. I know I've said that before, and I'm just saying that every chance I get, partly to remind myself also, because it can feel very overwhelming, as we may even fall into dark holes of depression or despair. Like, what is there that we can do? Well, again, there are many things we can do, and everybody has different roles to play in whatever it is that one can do. Some people are active in government and politics, and some people are active in writing and communicating with congressmen and senators, and are active on the streets, and other people are caretakers, and we need those people, and other people make connections. Everybody has to find a place where they can fit in and do something, even to the extent of simply spreading kindness and compassion and love, rather than encouraging fear and hate mongering. So I'm going to step down from that whole discussion, but it's very important to keep that in mind as we move through the second part of April, because it's easy to get discouraged when we look around and see what's happening, and when we see things falling apart. And again, I know I've said this before. But this goes way beyond red or blue or Democrat or Republican or what religion or race or what separation that you might feel based upon how you are alienated or fears of alienation from the whole. And I've said this again and again, and I'll say it one more time here. I'll probably be saying it again still in the future. And that is that our real battles are not with who we think that we've been told to worry about. Um, we've been pitted against each other with our differences, whatever they may seem to be, as a very conscious tool, so that we were too busy fighting each other rather than to fight the real enemy, which is the loss of law, the loss of the rule of law, the loss of the idealism of the idea of what freedom is, the what Matthew Fox is called democracide, the death of democracy. Um, because these are issues that go beyond whatever your political preferences are on any one issue, or whether you tend towards being progressive or conservative. This is not about that. This is about how the government is set up, and just to be absolutely clear, um, our answer right now does not lie with red or blue. It lies in something else that will come out of this, hopefully, as we realize that we all have work to do to make this social system that we live in to make it work. So enough of the rant on that. But I think this is really important to keep in mind as we move through April and as we get the overwhelming feeling of like our assertion of Mars may feel ineffectual against the hidden powers of the social system that has power that comes into being to put down that energy of Mars. That would be the Pluto opposite Mars. And then the feeling of is it even worth it to try the Venus Saturn conjunction? The feeling like happiness or gratification or pleasure just is not within the immediate realms. And of course, into all of this, still looking at the chart of April 15th, which tells us a lot about the entire rest of the month, is that we can see that Neptune, having just moved into Aries, is at 0 degrees of Aries, and Mercury now moving direct at 29, almost 0 degrees of Aries, but 29 degrees of Pisces, and that Mercury actually moves into Aries on April 15th, today, later in the day. It does it really at 11:25 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. Um, and so we have Mercury having retrograded back into Pisces, today moving into Aries, which normally would be clearing and forceful and clear thinking, because when Mercury moves into Aries, we just intuitively know what we need to say and what's going on. Our logic becomes willing to take things to the next step. The problem, of course, is, well, it's the problem. It's the problem and it's the solution. The problem is that as Mercury enters Aries tonight on April 15th, on Tuesday, April 15th, that it also immediately comes into a partile conjunction, partile meaning same degree, with Neptune, and the perfected, meaning same degree, same minute, conjunction with Neptune occurs tomorrow evening, tomorrow, always referencing the chart that we're looking at, and that would be on Wednesday, April 16th at 9:11 p.m. Mercury now moving direct, lines up with Neptune. And we don't have the typical Aries clarity that we would have when a planet moves into Aries, whether it's Mercury or any planet. But of course, we will have Venus now moving direct as it clears its conjunction with Saturn, which we already talked about, which is April 24th. Venus is still picking up speed by then. And by April 30th, Venus will move into Aries. And of course, again, this is like the excitement of the new and the ready to pioneer and the wishing or the wanting of something that's fresh. That's Venus and Aries and impulsive, but it too will be lining up with Neptune, which makes the illusions seem great, and I think it can muddle the energy. I said there was good news and bad news about both Mercury and Venus conjoining with Neptune, and the bad news is that it's hard to know what's real. It's hard to be precise with fact. It's hard to have a clear picture with Mercury of what our thoughts are or what we're hearing. We read into things. Our imagination is rampant. The same with Venus. What we think we want is can be based on imagination, on illusion, on fantasy. Now, that's the downside. The upside is that these fantasies, these visions, these illusions, our ideals are what drive us to basically take action so that we can turn these illusions into reality. As I often say, Neptune is the planet that creates the invisible framework and scaffolding upon which we can build Saturn reality or remodel the reality in which we live and build onto the reality that's already existing. In order to build something new, one needs to either create a framework or have scaffolding that we then take down once the illusion becomes real. And I think this is all part of what's going on at this point in time. So here on April 15th, there's one other important thing that I want to mention before we do move on, and that is that we can see here that the sun is at 26 degrees of Aries and Eris at 25 degrees of Aries and Chiron at 23 degrees of Aries. So this is a pretty close conjunction. Chiron will be moving into its exact conjunction with Eris. We'll talk more about that next month in the May forecast. But the fact that we've just had the sun line up with Eris at 25 degrees of Aries, the sun's now at 26. The fact that we have um, Uranus at 25 degrees of Taurus, and that we have Venus and Saturn at 24 and 26 degrees of Pisces, their midpoint being 25 degrees, and that 25, 24, 25, 26, let's say even 23, 24, 25, 26 of Pisces, Aries, and Taurus are making a very, very important pattern with Eris and even the Sun and Eris right in the middle. And remember, Eris as the sower of discord is not a negative energy. Eris as Mars's sister kind of is working with both Mars and Pluto in a way. But Mars starts the fight, and Pluto hangs out until the energy mutates or metamorphoses into something new. But Eris has an agenda. Eris kind of creates the chaos or the disorder in order to see what's wrong so it can then be integrated at a higher level. And I think this is part of what we've been experiencing through the first part of April, as Eris has been in that picture with a Venus coming into its third and final semi-sextile with Eris over the days ahead. And so Eris is really an important player here. And I think that through May and June and over this, later on this year, as Chiron and Eris do their once every 53, 50, 52, 53 year dance, that we're going to see the ability to learn, to teach, to deal with our demons and our wounds, and perhaps move through some of this difficult energy. All right, so I know that was a big prologue all on one chart, but it's so dynamic as to what's going on. It really does set up the whole energy for April. And remember, if you want the day by day charts and forecasts, I already did that in the April forecast. And if you just look at the main description and go to the more and go to the very bottom, you can click on any day and get the discussion for the exact energy of that day. But we'll still take this pretty quickly through the end of the month. But if you want another perspective on the day-to-day energy, you can go and look back at the forecast. So let's move this chart ahead to the 16th. Here on the 16th, we can see that the moon is now in Sagittarius. In fact, the moon entered Sagittarius last night at 7:37 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. But the moon moving through Sagittarius, as it moved into Sagittarius last night, it trined the Mercury and Neptune, and by tomorrow, it'll be trining the other planets in Aries. The moon in Sagittarius gives us a little bit of optimism, a little bit of hope. It enables us to see a little bit further into the distance, into the future. But here also on the 16th, as I mentioned earlier, we have the exact conjunction between Mercury and Neptune that's exact at 11 p.m. tonight. But we have another thing that's also cooking, and this is an important piece that's also been with us all month. It's a bit more of a subtle energy, but it's a very profound energy. And this is Jupiter coming into its sesqui-square, sesqui Latin for one and a half, like a sesquicentennial is 100 years plus a half of 150. It's 150 year. A sesqui-square is a square and a half. So it's 90 degrees a square plus 45 degrees, a half a square. It's 135 degrees. And we have Jupiter coming into its exact sesqui-square with Pluto. And this is the third and final one of these. The first one was back on in early August um, and of last year of 2024. And then the second one, while Jupiter was retrograde, was mid-December. It was exact on December 12th. And the third and final one being exact now on the 16th, actually the 17th. Let me move this ahead to the 17th. And here on the 17th, the Jupiter sesqui-square to Pluto is exact. Technically, it's exact at about 1 o'clock this morning. But again, this is such a slow-moving aspect that this has been with an orb for a week or so and will remain so. So what is Jupiter sesqui-square Pluto? Well, remember, Jupiter is expansion, it's optimism. Jupiter is confidence. Jupiter is the idea of distance and of foreign energy. It's foreign travel, far away places. And Pluto, again, is the gradual transformation that occurs when things meet a deeper energy that it doesn't even know that it was there. Now, I would suggest that this Jupiter sesqui-square, sesquiquadrate, or square and a half to Pluto has been part of the tariff fiasco that's still in the process of unfolding, as this idea of Jupiter in Gemini, and might say in passing that Jupiter is very active right now in Donald Trump's chart, but that Jupiter in Gemini is about the expansion of trade because Mercury rules Gemini, and the word mercantile comes from Mercury because it's basically trade is communication. It's a form of interchange, of back and forth. And so Jupiter in Gemini is about this whole process of trade, but it's Jupiter, it's international, it's foreign energy, and it's making that complicated sesqui-square, which is kind of it has that energy like a square where there's conflict, there's engagement, there's energy that isn't working real easily. But it's with Pluto, which is that hidden, deeper, more powerful energy that denotes a transformation that is unfolding. This is why it's not a single event, it's still in process. I should also note that midday on April 17th, as the moon is moving through Sagittarius and approaching the trines to Chiron, Eris, and the sun, it's also making an opposition to Jupiter. And so we may again see this whole energy of some taking what I like to call a bridge too far, taking something and making it too big, taking something and over expanding it, overstating one's position, being overconfident. All of these things are true. And in the meantime, Mars, which is getting closer and closer to its change of signs, because Mars moves into Leo later in the day today. We're looking at the chart um, for noon, but by 9:20 p.m., Mars has moved from Cancer into Leo. And let's move this chart ahead to the 18th. And we'll see now that Mars has moved into Leo. And in its process of moving into Leo, which it did now that we're looking at the chart of the 18th, Mars actually moved into Leo late last night, but Mars was within range of making trines over this past week or so with Venus and Saturn. That's the restraint, the holding back, the this idea isn't working, this defense, Venus, I'm sorry, Mars in Cancer are angry, aggressive energy, which is about defending our boundaries economically, tariffs, being trined by Venus and Saturn. The idea of, gee, this looks good, but Saturn holding that energy back. And now, as Mars moves into Leo, it makes a trine with Neptune and Mercury, which I think allows flow of communication. Mercury is moving faster than Mars, and even when Mercury retrograded back, it just barely touched the trine to Mars. So it's not perfecting, but it's still very, very close. And this gives us a flow of communication between that energy of Mars, and yet it's also tinted by the illusion and the fabrication, the lies, the deceit, the being misled or misleading ourselves with Neptune involved. And so I think these are all important aspects to keep in mind. The other thing is that on April 18th, we also have the moon moving into Capricorn. It does that at 7:12 a.m. And that kind of gives us a little bit more serious of a feeling. It's almost like it's not like there's no good news. I mean, there's still opportunity here. We're still working under Venus and Saturn making that sextile with Uranus. That was Saturn sextile Uranus was exact back on April 4th, I think that was. Yeah, on April 4th. And this is the, dance between Saturn holding back conservatism, the stable, the status quo, the authoritative top-down rulership or management versus Uranus, the radical, the progressive, the upheaval, unstable. And these two energies all through April are working their way through this. But now, as Venus kind of comes into this picture, Venus making sextiles with Uranus as it comes into that third and final conjunction with Saturn. The sextile with Uranus is on the 20th, and the conjunction with Saturn, remember, is on the 24th. So we still have this restraint building, but we have the excitement of possibility of what's around the bend. But just keep in mind that Eris is still dynamically there, because if we look at that Venus, Saturn, sextile Uranus, Eris is right smack at the midpoint, at the halfway point, making a half sextile or a semi-sextile which is basically an uncomfortable aspect. It's the semi-sextile and the quincunx are both one sign away from the conjunction or the opposition. And these are irritating. They're annoying. They're not light aspects, but they just, it's like that whole idea of good fences make good neighbors, the poem by Robert Frost. It's like this is an exacerbation of neighbors that have very different ways of looking at things. That's Pisces to Aries or Aries to Taurus. And so that Eris is very much in high focus during this period of time. Also note here that the sun is at 28 degrees and 59 minutes, meaning that it's just right at 29 degrees of Aries. And if we move this ahead to noon on the 19th, we can see that the sun is now at 29 degrees and 58 minutes of Aries, meaning that just an hour later, actually 12:55 p.m. on Saturday the 19th, the sun moves from Aries into Taurus. And this, I think, introduces some stability into the mix. We kind of entrench, we become more, what's the word, obstinate in whatever it is that we're doing. Wherever we're going, we're more driven to just get there, whatever it takes. Notice still that Mars is coming into its exact perfected trine with Neptune. Mars here at 0 degrees Leo and 40 minutes, and Neptune at 0 degrees Aries and 44 minutes. That trine is actually perfected at 3:52 p.m., but the exact moment is less important than this has been working on us, yesterday, the day before, today, tomorrow, the next day, and it will continue for a bit. And especially as Mars is now building day by day, getting closer and closer to its opposition to Pluto, that there's deep energy here still cooking. It's not going away. At noon on the 20th, we can see that the moon now is at 27 degrees of Capricorn. It moves into Aquarius at 4:21 this afternoon. And this is significant because as the moon moves into Aquarius, it comes into conjunction with Pluto, as Mars is now only let's see, Mars is it's about 2 3/4 degrees from being in that exact opposition. Mars is moving quite fast now. The other thing to note here is that as Mars is moving into the opposition to Pluto, we also have Mercury making a sextile with Pluto on one side of the opposition, and it's really Mercury and Neptune together, and Mars just having passed through its trine to Neptune. It's like Mercury and Neptune are at the point of Thales, the release point from the Mars opposition to the Moon and Pluto. And so here I think we can really see the propensity towards being misled, the propensity towards not knowing what's going on, the confusion of seeing boundaries disintegrate and hearing the words that people are saying, but really not knowing what the truth is. This is complicated because Venus is making its exact sextile with Uranus today. And again, it's really Venus Saturn. It's really Venus Saturn and the North Node. Um, and so this is very important because there's some awakening. There's some movement here, especially with Mercury, Venus, and Mars now all going direct. But today we also have Mercury making that exact sextile with Pluto, which means that words are going deeper. They're not staying shallow. They're really going into a place where it's bringing things up that maybe were hidden before. And of course, all of that would be important and fine, and it is. But at the same time, we also have Mars making a square with the Sun. That square occurs this morning on April 20th. It actually, no, the exact square is at 6:33 p.m. Um, because the sun is moving faster than Mars. And so the sun actually catches up to that 1 degree and 5 minutes where Mars is. It reaches 1 degree and 5 or 6 minutes yet later this evening. So the Mars being squared by the sun in stubborn Taurus basically says we're entrenching, we're digging in our heels, we're ready for a fight. And that sun, remember, over the next few days, it's not only squaring Mars, but it's also today on April 20th being squared by the moon, and it will over the next couple of days square Pluto. The sun square Pluto exact is on the evening of April 23rd. We'll get to that chart in just a minute. But the energy here is difficult. The energy is building. And it's almost like there's no easy way out. We also need to note here that Saturn, which is inching forward, moving direct, the north node of the moon, remember the nodes move backwards, they retrograde. We're also coming into Saturn conjoining the North Node. And of course, Venus is coming into that same conjunction also. And I think it's important here to understand that when planets conjoin with the North Node, that there's something here that touches I like to call them time vortexes. They're like black hole, white holes of time where the energy kind of comes from other places, other times. There's a connection with, past lives, future lives. It's like there's a whole evolutionary process here that happens. And when Saturn lines up with the North Node, that'll be exact tomorrow, by the way, on the 21st. Um, it's not it I don't want to say it's not easy. There's real karma here. Things are coming round, and the things that are unfolding around this period of time of, let's say, the 15th through the end of the month in April, but maybe coming to a crescendo around the 18th, 19th, 20th, 21st, 22nd, when Saturn joins up with the nodes, with the nodal axis. This is very there's a whole thing of here you get what you deserve, both good news and bad news. And that's on the 21st. As we let me move here to the 21st. That's on the 21st. We can see that Saturn now has passed the North Node, but they're still both at 26 degrees of Pisces. The other thing that we need to see here is the fact that the moon now moving through Aquarius has passed its conjunction with Pluto. Mars is moving closer again and again, day by day, to its opposition with Pluto. As we move here to the 22nd, now we can see that at noon, the moon is at the end of Aquarius. And in fact, the moon enters Pisces at 10:06 p.m. this evening. 10:06 p.m., the moon moves into Pisces. And then, of course, over the next few days, as we get closer and closer to the new moon, the moon, as it moves through Pisces, is going to catch up with the Venus North Node, Saturn, Neptune, Mercury, Chiron, Eris, and the Sun, all over the next 6 days. The other thing here to note is that as the moon moves into Pisces, there's a bit of a softening of the energy. And again, we need to realize, though, that when the moon's in Pisces, sometimes we lose our sense of direction. It's just a little bit harder to get a bearing on where we are, where we've come from, and where we're going. As we move to the 23rd, we now have the exact square between the Sun and Pluto, and Mars is now only a degree away, a little bit over a degree, away from its opposition to Pluto. And so we can see here that we have this T square with the stabilizing, simplistic, obstinate, determined sun in Taurus that's feeding into this fixed energy of Mars stating its intention over dramatically. It's not going to move. It's making a big deal out of how it wants to go and where it wants to get to and what its position is. And it's meeting up with this deeper, darker, more hidden energy of Pluto. This is a difficult period of time. It's very complicated. There's more going on than meets the eye. And all I can say is that it's up to all of us to just keep calm, keep cool, and there will be a time for us to do whatever we need to do. But acting out of anger or fear is not going to get us where we want to be. This is on the 23rd. Um, and also on the 23rd, I should mention that Venus actually is catching up with the North Node. Venus still moving faster than Saturn. And again, it will catch up with Saturn tomorrow. We'll see that in the chart for the 24th in just a moment. But again, these are dynamic times that are touching deeper places. It's as important or significant or overwhelming as things might feel in this moment, it's even more important than it seems. That's what these connections with the nodal axis are representing to me. That's on the 23rd. And you can see here as we move to the 24th, the moon is now going to catch up later in the day on the 24th with the nodal axis and with Venus and Saturn. The moon will actually move into Aries late tonight or early tomorrow morning, depending upon where you are. It does it at 12:23 a.m. on the 25th here in Seattle. But that moon moving through Pisces is quite active, quite emotional. And again, we look at the Mars opposing Pluto. And now we see that Mars opposing Pluto is less than 1 degree of orb. The other thing that we see here on the 24th now is we can see that Venus and Saturn are both at 27 degrees of Pisces. The Venus conjunct Saturn happens at 5:01 p.m. That's exact. But again, we've been feeling this for days. We'll still feel it for days. In fact, I would suggest that we're going to feel the weight of the Saturn on Venus until Venus moves into Aries as it does on the 30th. Now, remember, Venus and Saturn is not all bad. In fact, it gives us staying power. Venus and Saturn says, I'm less interested in the fast fix, in making something happen in this moment than I am in getting it right for the long term. Venus conjoined with Saturn says I'm less interested in immediate gratification than I am in the commitment that creates something that has longevity. And of course, the moon is moving through those conjunctions with both the nodal axis Venus and Saturn. So we're seeing a huge amount of something that's creating stability here. And yet at the same time, we still have the sun, even though it's slightly past the exact perfected aspect, we still have the sun squaring Pluto and squaring Mars, while Mars is coming into that exact opposition to Pluto that I think is going to create some real dramatic um, I wanted to use the word explosion, but I don't mean a physical explosion because in some ways we're also still working with the Saturn sextile to Uranus, even though that aspect is separating. We're still getting a flavor of that Uranian energy, but I think it's more the Uranian energy that creates explosions. This is more about deconstruction, that's the Mars Pluto, and the fear of losing control. And yet, in losing control, something happens that creates an emptiness that the death then turns into rebirth. Things have to end in order for new things to be born. In order for a butterfly to to fly, there has to be the death of a caterpillar. And I see that this Mars opposed Pluto, again, going back to election day, back to January, back to presidential election day last November, back to January of this year when we had the retrograde Mars opposed Pluto, and we had the first of the three Saturn conjunct the Venus conjunct Saturns. That's exact today on the 24th. And we also have today the sun making a half square with Jupiter, which again is talking about overcommitment, overdoing, overconfidence. We need to be careful of this energy because here on the 24th through the 27th, 26th, 27th, things can get a bit out of hand. Let's move it to the 25th. We'll see that the moon here has moved into Aries. The moon actually moved into Aries at 12:25 a.m. Pacific time this morning on the 25th, on Friday the 25th. But of course, when it did that, it also lined up with Neptune again, that sense of confusion, illusion, delusion. And then throughout today, by midday, the moon is reaching Mercury. We may be overly emotional in our communications. But look how close now the Mars is in opposition to Pluto. Remember that Mars opposition Pluto is exact tomorrow at 6:05 p.m. Um, and let's actually move this forward. And now we can see that the Mars opposed Pluto still being squared by the sun, but this is a real powerhouse now. And that Mars opposition Pluto is kind of standing a little more alone. There's still the leftover of the Taurus that doesn't want to move, that wants to continue on its same path. But something here changes. Something's got to give. I mean, we have Venus and Saturn both now past the nodal axis. We have Venus heading toward Aries, Saturn heading toward Aries, although it'll take another several weeks for it to get there. Saturn actually enters Aries the end of May, May 24th. So we still have a little bit of time, but all of this is about endings and beginning. Things are changing, and as the moon is moving through Aries, by the midday on the 26th, it will also conjoin both Chiron and Eris. So it's stirring up energy here. This is a tough day. We'll see what happens, but it also has the potential for breakthrough. But the question is, will we be able to hold the energy? Will we be able to keep it cool enough that the process can occur, or will we prematurely want to open up the chrysalis to let the butterfly emerge prematurely? Because if we do that, as many of you I'm sure know, that if you open up a chrysalis or the cocoon to let the struggling butterfly out, it'll never fly because it gains the strength that it needs to fly. It gains the strength in its wings by its struggle to break out of the cocoon. And so here the danger is overacting prematurely without letting this whole process play through one way or another. We don't know how this is all going. We just know that it ain't over yet. That is on the 20 on the 26th. The other thing that we have going here is that we're coming into a period of time. Mercury's moving rather quickly now, and it's still building speed. And Mercury direct moving through Aries as it reaches 11 degrees of Aries, it makes a half square with Uranus. And let's move this to the 27th, and that Mercury half square Uranus is exact. Mercury half square to Uranus. Actually is exact at 8 o'clock this morning, 8 a.m. Pacific time. And this is we're coming into here also the new moon, which is exact just afternoon. Let's actually look at the chart for 12:31 p.m. Pacific time, and we can see that there is the sun and moon at 7 degrees of Taurus in 47 minutes. And this square, this new moon is still square the Mars and Pluto, but it's almost like it's working its way away from that. It's almost like that part is now in history. It's in the past. It still has ramifications. We're still messing with the energy. It's still around us. But the thing that's exact today is that Mercury is making this half square with Uranus, which basically says what we say, this is Mercury in Aries, what we say without thinking, what we say just kind of impulsively, intuitive, when we let our intuition run right out our mouth, we may say things that are Uranian, that are shocking, that are surprising, that are inconvenient, things that have ramifications or consequences that we weren't aware of. It's that, it's the speak now or forever hold your peace. And it's like we speak now, and maybe sometimes it may not be the right time to say things, but what's said can't be unsaid. And I think that this new moon kind of has that energy about it, again, of wanting to hold that Taurus sense of this is where I'm standing. I feel like it's like the Battle of the Alamo or Custer's Last Stand or Napoleon at Waterloo. It doesn't have to be the end, but it's about holding a position and not giving it up, and yet saying something that can really alter the fabric of what's going on. We're also now moving away from the Mars opposition to Pluto, but this energy is going to linger for several days. It's not going to go away, momentarily. Meaning, it's not going to go away right. It's not going to vanish right away. By the way, I don't think I mentioned that although the new moon occurs today at what did I say, at 12:31 p.m., the moon actually moved into Taurus earlier this morning at 12:16 a.m. And so the energy of that Taurus holding position of being in one sense, of wanting simplicity, of wanting to find peace. There is something here about maybe wanting to undo what's been done if we can in some way make something work. Or maybe it's just a standoff where two sides have been drawn and there is no easy resolution. I think the saving grace here is that Venus is now at 28.5 degrees of Taurus. As we move this ahead to the 28th, we can see that by midday on the 28th, the moon at latter degrees of Taurus is coming into its conjunction with Uranus. That happens at about 6 p.m., give or take. I'm just ballparking that. Um, on Monday, the 28th. And that again can release another round of kind of unpredictable reactions that I think can be useful in breaking up this stuck energy. And it really seems to me like the energy is a bit stuck. Also, the moon moves out of Taurus and into Gemini just before midnight tonight on Monday, the 28th. It does that at 11:34 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time. And so as we wake up tomorrow on Tuesday, okay, now it's today on Tuesday, the 29th. We can see that the moon is in Gemini. As that moon moved through Gemini earlier today, it made a trine with Pluto. And a sextile with Mars. This is about how our emotional expression, that would be the moon, using language, interaction, that would be Gemini, can release some of the stress and tension from the now separating energy of the Mars moving away from its opposition to Pluto. I think we're seeing some potential for what could or may happen next month in May. And we can see here now also that Venus is at 29.5 degrees of Pisces, which means that when we move this to April 30th, we now see that Saturn is the only planet left in Pisces after that whole Pisces lineup last month. But we now have Venus, Neptune, Mercury, Chiron, and Eris all in Aries. Saturn still lingering back in Pisces for not quite another month. But we also see that midday today, just before noon Pacific time, the moon will make a conjunction with Jupiter. And here we have a sense of, again, potential of confidence, of optimism, of growth that I think can feel quite positive. I think all of this energy now in Aries, I think we're getting a flavor and a sense of what we need to do to create the world in which we want to live, but we're not getting a chance to effect the vision yet. I think that's going to take until Saturn moves into Aries, making its almost conjunction with Neptune through June and July. Then they turn retrograde, and then they'll make their exact conjunction in at 0 degrees of Aries next February. At the same time, aside from Saturn and Neptune solidly moving into Aries, we will also have Uranus moving into Gemini, and Jupiter moving into Cancer. And so I think that it's going to take over the summer and really until next year for us to really kind of reclaim the world that we want to live in, if we get to do that or not. And again, as I've said time and again, um, it really depends on what we do now as to what will happen in a few months and in a year or so. What I do know from the astrology, though, is that being complacent now will lead to a status quo next year and the year after. That it's really important, for us to express what we need to express so that we don't have the world that we want to live in taken from us by the extremely wealthy, and just lose everything that we thought we might have had. And of course, just again in passing here, I would mention that at the first sextile of Saturn and Uranus on the same day. This is back on April 4th, that weekend of April 4th, 5th, 6th, when we had Saturn sextile Uranus, then we had Mars squaring Eris, and we had Mars sextiling Uranus from the other side, while Mars was trining Saturn. If you missed this, go back and listen to my April forecast and click to the April 4th date, because it's one of those days that I think is a foreshadowing of what's to come. And of course, on that day, it's important to note that there were millions, literally, not figuratively, actually millions of people on the streets around the world. Big cities, little cities, small towns in the United States, in New York, in Boston, in Chicago, in Los Angeles, in San Francisco, in Seattle, in little towns, and all around the world. And and I think that that is an important marker just to show what may be around the bend. But as we look here at the last day of April, I think we begin to see that as all these energies move into Aries, the sun moving through Taurus, we're definitely moving into new territory. And I look forward to connecting up with you all for the May forecast. And as many of you know, I'll be the first weekend of May, I'll be doing the conference with Steve Judd, Nick Campion, Penny Thornton, and Alex Trenoweth in London. And I'll be producing this from the UK. And so it might be a little bit different, but I will see you all again on the 1st of May. And until then, not only think cosmically and act locally, but think compassionately, think kindly, and be safe. Do whatever you need to do to be safe, because it's really important that we make it through this difficult period of time so that we can enjoy the fruits of our labor on the far end of it. Thank you all, and I'll see you all down the road. Peace out.